Well, Victoria, thank you so much for being here with me on the Entrepreneurial Success Podcast. I know you and I already had great conversations before this recording, but let's take this up a notch. And I'm sure the audience is going to be very intrigued when we talk about this. Before we get started, why don't I hand over to you and you can introduce yourself to everyone and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Henriette, and lovely to join you here today as well. So hello to everybody. I'm Victoria Reynoldson. I'm a communication and culture coach, and I work with international professionals all over the world, generally who have English as a second language, and they're looking to build up their communication and cultural confidence. And this is for them to grow their business or to grow their career if they're working in a business.
My gosh, and as you said that, I'm like, yep, that's me, hands up. Oh, we can definitely talk about this. But how did you get started? I mean, how did you get started in communication? What kind of brought that on for you to go, this is the direction that I just fell in love with, and I'm going to do this and create a business around it?
Sure. So, I mean, if I look back, the thread throughout my whole life was all about language and communication. So I had a great passion for languages when I was younger. I went and studied languages at university. And then I started in my first career in brand marketing, which of course is about communication, but with consumers. And I always loved playing with words and enjoyed understanding how communication worked. But one of the things that I found very, very interesting, I worked 12 years in brand marketing, and I was primarily working in organizations that were international. I was based in London, the UK, where I am today, and I was working in international project teams. And I got really fascinated when I was working in these teams about how we were communicating with each other internally. So what I noticed was that we all make this very big assumption that the world of business is in English. So I have a privilege in the sense that is my first language, but also that the way we're communicating with each other wasn't always that clear, even if English was everybody's first language, let alone for other people who had English as their second, third, fourth language. And, sometimes those projects run really, really smoothly. Sometimes there were issues and it led to misunderstandings, miscommunications. Sometimes it was a cultural issue as well. And I got really fascinated in this area. And I kind of found that there was something going on, which I call now the communication gap, which was the gap between what we think we're saying and what is actually being heard and interpreted. And I can see you nodding there, but it's crazy. I mean, it's something where we all assume we're speaking the same way, and it just isn't that way. How we're saying it is very, very different, and it can lead to a lot of frustration, confusion, and clearly wasted time as we try and rework what needs to be done. So that's kind of really, where it came from for me, this idea that there is this communication gap that goes on in business. And I was like, do you know what? I don't think this is just about large corporate. I think this also happens in lots of different contexts and situations. And so, that idea of the communication gap for me is really kind of what led me to think about this and think about, actually, I think there's an opportunity to help people where communication meets culture and help them think about how they're communicating and coming across in the way that they want to. So that kind of really led me down this path. So I requalified into this area. I decided I wanted to kind of build my skills in this area. And that's when I set up the business. So my business is called Perfect Cuppa English. And we just recently celebrated my 7th business birthday. So, working with clients, both individually in some coaching programs, but actually also increasingly working with teams as well and helping corporate teams think about how they're communicating as well.
Oh my gosh, well, congratulations on 7 years.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very exciting.
The name. It is, it makes so much sense in a nutshell. But it's so funny. I was shaking my head vigorously as you were talking, and I'm sure you could see that, because everything you said made so much sense. And I've seen this personally within myself, but I've also seen it when I work with my clients, about communication. That is the number one aspect that I've always seen time and time again, where people cannot communicate or articulate what it is, number one, that they do, number two, what it is that they're offering, and then number three, in order to make a sale. And I find that is such a huge thing, actually. And it comes beautifully together that once you kind of understand how to communicate perfectly, not just with a potential client, but even just with friends and colleagues and family, oh my gosh, it really opens up so many doors, so many opportunities. And like you say, friction out the door.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, think about it from a sort of, a business owner point of view, think about it from an entrepreneur's point of view. A simple question like, what do you do? It's a really simple question, right? We all know what we do, right? But somehow when we get asked this question, we get thrown. And whether it's in a personal context or in a professional context or networking, somehow we just don't seem to know how to kind of express it clearly and simply. And I think there are two things that happen in that situation. Either we we say it, but it isn't really quite what it is we do. Or alternatively, we end up explaining it in huge amounts of detail for about 5 minutes. And obviously that doesn't work either, whatever the context is. So, I think there's that, there's definitely something about messaging, what we say. And then I think there's also this point about, how we're saying it, how we're coming across. And often the people that I'm working with, have that challenge of speaking up and sharing their message, because they also feel that, they worry about how they sound, and they worry about, how they're coming across, and perhaps a lack of confidence, or lack of confidence in some situations to really speak up.
I know, and this kind of bridge beautifully into what you want to share with us, and what I want to share, because I'm getting so excited talking about it. And I think when it comes to communication, there's, like you say, that one thing that is confidence. We're not born with it. Nobody's born with confidence. It's something that you will learn as you experiment and as you kind of just go on a journey. Okay. So let's talk from a business context. And I think this is really important for everybody listening to this. What would you say, or what are the tips that you would say would help people to unlock that confidence in order to just communicate better?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with the idea of it's a journey. So I think people often look up to TED speakers and they see confident speakers and they think, wow, that person must have always been like that. That must have been like just how they always were. And it's just not like that. So my first point I always say to people is, it's not like a switch. It's not like you turn it on one day and hooray, forever you are confident. And even though I'm a communication coach, I have my days when I'm having off days and I'm not really communicating as confidently as I'd like to. Or there are days when I'm just not quite feeling the energy and it's not coming across in the way I want to. Or maybe I'm stumbling a bit in my words for some reason. And I think that's really important to understand and know that we all go through this. We go through an improvement journey, and then we also have our ups and downs. It's not like we hit the kind of confidence and we go tick, done with that. So there is that first point. And then the other point for me, which I'm very passionate about this, is that what I like to help the people I work with think about is it's about communication agility, and it's not about perfection. So I think what is quite interesting, because my clients generally have English as their second or third or fourth language, they generally have this idea of language being, has to be about the rules. I have to be able to speak perfectly and fluently. I have to know all the grammar. I have to pronounce everything absolutely correctly. And that's because of the way we learn languages on our journey. We're taught that it's a very left-brained activity. We kind of learn all the rules. But when it comes to communication is something different. Communication is about connection, and it's about connecting like we are now, human to human, and having really good conversations. So actually that isn't about perfection at all. It's about, how we're trying to communicate with each other and connect, and how we're saying what we're saying. So what I try and get people away from is the idea of perfection, and saying, look, it's much better for you to have agility, which means that if you do lose your words, or you can't think about what to say next, it's okay to smile, laugh at yourself, maybe check your notes if you're doing some sort of talk, or if it's just more spontaneous, admit it and say, hey, I forgot my point. But anyway, moving on to the next thing. And I think that is so much better, because that makes you a better communicator, because you're being more real and being more yourself. And this idea of communication agility, I really like to help people think about that mindset, because as one client said to me once, I just want to be able to, say things my way and be 100% me. And I think that's exactly what it's about. It's not about saying 100% perfectly, but it is about being 100% you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And so much of what you're saying resonates with me personally, because English is my second language. I mean, coming from South Africa, I originally got brought up speaking Afrikaans, but then you learn English in school and it's exactly like that. Your grammar is going to be perfect, the way you pronounce things, tenses. So when I started my business, I completely freaked out, thinking now I've got to show up and be visible, speak English, and I do not say things correctly. My tenses are wrong. But you know what? I don't care anymore.
Yes. And that's so important, right? Because it's not about that. People don't connect with you because of your grammar.
Exactly.
They connect with you. Yeah.
It is a journey. And I had to discover that. And I remember the first time I recorded myself a video, and I was mortified when I looked at the replay of this video. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. And basically what I did is I had a script that I was kind of reading off, recording myself doing this video. And I thought, this is not me. This is so fake. I thought, okay, let's get rid of the script and let's just go and talk about this. And I just recorded myself. And you know what? As I was listening to it, I was like, yeah, there's a flow. Oh my gosh, this is great. This is me. This is how I talk. Oh, tense is wrong. Oh, I can't get words right. Oh my gosh, I messed up there. But you know what? That experience for me really made me kind of take that first step and realize it is not about the grammar. It's not about the tenses. It's not about perfectionism. And yeah, today I still get words wrong. I still mess up my tenses. And sometimes I just come up with things and I just make up things and I'm going, that was something that people used to say, or did I just make it up? I don't care, because at the end of the day, it's like you say, it's that communication, how you show up and the message that you're bringing through. And that was a big learning curve for me. And I'm so glad you mentioned it. And I'm so sorry to use myself as an example here, but I can only talk for myself for what I've experienced. And that led me to do the podcast, to
That's fantastic.
Just go with it, go with the flow and see where it takes me.
And I think that's so brilliant, because I meet so many business owners who sadly hold themselves back. They're sort of like, I'd love to do this, but I just can't quite do it. And that makes me so sad, because obviously there's so much talent and so much actually valuable contribution these people have to make. And they kind of hold back because they feel like they can't quite do it. And whatever the context may be, whether it's you've always wanted to, I don't know, launch a podcast or do more videos or go live, or even in the context of, for some people, even meetings, some meetings can be very challenging to actually, speak up and be confident in front of a large group of people, or do a talk or a presentation. So whatever that context is, people often hold back because they hesitate to speak up. And I'm very passionate about this. I really want people to have their share of voice and their share of opinion in the world, because, that's what they bring. They bring great, great knowledge, insight, expertise that the world needs to hear. So, I'm about that idea of developing not only mindset, but also these skills around communication agility, and really focusing in on their specific situations so that people get that confidence for that talk, that podcast, that video, and they can use my skills and strategies to really help them make the start. Because like you say, once you start, you build up the experience of it and you build up that kind of feeling for it. And, going back to my own story, I wasn't always that confident. In fact, I faced my own confidence challenge back in my 20s, when I was suddenly in a job having to present very regularly every month to a sales team of 100 people. And that totally freaked me out. Like, I've absolutely hated presenting, which seems funny now when I do a lot of talking for my role. But, I really, really did not enjoy presenting, and I would do anything to avoid it. And I got into this particular job role and I had to do it every single month. And I remember gritting my teeth through the first one and thinking, I can't do it like this anymore. I've got to find a way through. And I think there are a couple of tips that, I kind of learned at that time, which I think might be, also applicable to share with everybody today. But a lot of it was about my mindset and believing that I could do it and that I could visualize what that looks like. So I could actually imagine being successful in that situation. But I think also I had this idea of acting as if. So I just said to myself, okay, look, what if you were that really confident presenter? What would that look like and sound like? And actually, what if you did just for that short time, do that? So that was kind of like how I kind of got my way through that. And actually, the more I did it, the more I built up the experience. And suddenly it became so much more automatic behavior for me. So I think that's, something for everybody to kind of hopefully kind of realize that everybody can do this. Everybody can achieve this.
Yes. And it's not so much just about speaking in front of a crowd. It is even if you're just having a conversation with another person, is having that confidence in order to communicate about who you are and what you're doing, which is what you said. And I think this is where you mentioned another thing, which I want to talk about, which you said, share your voice and, that visibility. And I think this is one of those things as well, where we're so much these days living in a world where we are, how can I say, we are scared about people's opinions of us.
Yes.
But from your point of view, what would you kind of say to people who want to share their voice and who just really want to expand on their visibility?
So a lot of this is about, making sure that you have the right, we talked about mindset and developing the right mindset, but also get a real view on where you are today. So if we don't know, even if we know where we're aiming for, if we don't know where we're starting from, then it's hard to kind of know what kind of path we need to take. And one of the things I find about communication is that people find it really hard to have a good view of themselves, of how they're doing. So like you talked about when you first did maybe video or podcasting, we get very self-critical. We start noticing things we really don't like about our voice or how we're looking, or we really notice that spot on the end of our nose or whatever it might be. So it's very easy to get caught up in our own heads with the stories in our heads. So one of the first things I'd say is it's really important to get objective feedback. Now, if you're a business owner, think about who you could ask. Ask yourself, is there somebody you know and trust, which is important as well, to give you that feedback, and ask them for some really specific questions about your type of communication. So, what do I do well, and what can I improve? How does it come across? Was the message clear, for example? How did my voice sound? So you can really ask some specific questions and get that feedback. And look, if you don't have anybody to ask, come and ask me. I'm always really happy to help people, give them feedback about their communication style. But once you've got that starting point, then you can build up to, okay, this is my ideal. This is where I want to get to. Here's the path that I need to go on. And clearly you can build up by learning about different communication skills and strategies. For example, I share these via my videos that I do and produce each week. But also, clearly, if you're somebody who feels like you need a real structure and a support there, then, for example, I do communication confidence programs that can lead you through a real structure of 3 months towards actually developing the skills you need to perform in the way that you want to.
Yeah. And I think also what you're saying is so important, because even though you give them the structure, the most important thing is they can take that structure and they can make it their own. They can make it line up with their own authentic self. And I find this is where a lot of people make the mistake, where they kind of get a structure or they kind of get a layout and they kind of use that word for word almost in order to communicate then with people, whether it's a client or whether it's people just through networking or connections. And that is so much so where you kind of lose yourself, and people can feel that, they can sense that. And this is where you lose the essence of communication. But if you have a structure, great, but make it your own.
I completely agree with you. You have to personalize it to your own situation, and you have to reflect. If you're trying out whatever the structure or frameworks that you're using to help you develop communication skills, you have to one, activate it clearly, because if it just sits as a framework or a structure, it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
So you actually have to try it out. And then one of my big things is actually making sure people reflect afterwards. Okay, so what worked here? What would I sort of absolutely take forward and try again? And what would I do differently? What really didn't work for me and just made me sound like really kind of fake? So, I was working with a client recently, and she talked about the fact that she was starting to use a teleprompter. Various apps out there, fantastic idea in theory, but she said it totally threw her because she felt like she was trying to read and it didn't feel like she was kind of connecting and looking at the camera enough. So she, in the end, just ditched the idea because it just wasn't working for her. For somebody else, that might be the perfect way for them to enhance their communication ability and for them to feel confident and relax. For her, it was a distraction. So, what you've got to try out these techniques and strategies and then work out, is this right for me? And if not, move on and try something differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is what is so wonderful with the world where we live in today, because there are so many ways for you to kind of try things out.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, there's going to come a point where you're going to go, okay, I've got to choose now. Not everything is working for me. What is aligned with me? What can I work with? And I think, this is where, in particular with when I work with my clients, we definitely start, you talk about communication, I talk about the relationship strategy. So it's kind of like the same thing, but it's very much about me giving them that structure as well and say, this is how you can communicate, but let's make it your own. So that when you sit in front of that potential client, what is that conversation going to look like? And how are you going to facilitate a great conversation whereby they feel, oh my gosh, she gets me.
Yes.
And I think this is what is so important, because what you do is you share your voice, but you do it in such a way whereby you instill confidence in the other person to have that conversation with you. And if you do that once, it instills confidence in you that basically helps you go, oh my gosh, this is great. I just had the most amazing conversation with a client or with a potential client who hopefully signs up as a client. But when you do that once, you go like, this is working. This is great. I'm going to do it again and again and again.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, maybe you need to go through a couple of elements to find out what works for you and what doesn't. But once you've found that thing that is aligned with you, communication is just the most beautiful thing that just helps you to grow individually, but also as a business owner.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it's about flow and energy.
Yeah.
And, one of the points that I talk quite a lot about with my clients is that I work with clients who are based in the UK. I work with clients all over the world, literally all over the world. And so many of them are still working for the major part virtually, like this, via Zoom, via Teams, whatever, Google Meet. So, it's also about how do we communicate via this like rectangle we live in, right? So when you can't see my whole body, how do we really connect with people via the screen when we're all a bit bored of screens, but it's sort of how we still have to keep doing business, right? So, I mean, I think for me, I'm a great believer in I stand. You probably can't tell, but I'm standing right now. For me, I always try and do my client meetings standing up, and my, certainly anything like this in terms of talks or podcast interviews. But I think, for me, that gives you totally different energy. So it's not just, again, what we're saying, it's how we're saying it, how we're coming across. And when it comes to the virtual space and communication, energy is so important. That's how, we're going to connect with people we probably never meet, and really build that great relationship that we have.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it funny these days? I've experienced when I get a phone call, I almost feel like I want to see the person.
Yes.
I don't just want to hear them. I want to see the person that I'm having a conversation with, because we've been so stimulated now these days with what we do online. The energy is so much different from being online to being in person to just having a phone call. But I think, with technology these days, sharing that energy just through something like Zoom is so powerful, but you still got to show up with the right energy as if you were meeting that person in real life.
Absolutely. And I think that's the bit sometimes people forget. They kind of sit down, very comfortable, kind of slightly slouching, maybe even getting slightly distracted by other things they're doing without happening with their laptop. But, we have to imagine we are meeting somebody face to face. and we give them that amount of attention, that amount of real focus, and they feel that. You know, people feel when we are focused on them and we're listening to them. I mean, one of the things I'm passionate about is listening to people well, because we seem to have lost that ability, many of us, to really listen and work out what's going on. But it's, you know, it's so important, because it is easy for all of us to get distracted and feel like we're being still slightly multitasking in the background, and somehow people won't notice. They notice. You just don't have the same connection if you aren't putting your energy there.
Yeah, I always say to people is, you know, unfortunately from a young age, we get taught how to talk. We never get taught how to listen. And I think that is where there's a little bit of an element when it comes to miscommunication. So much is because we don't really talk about listening and helping people to listen, which is part of communication at the end of the day as well. It's not just about blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
But another thing that I wanted to ask you, which is obviously, you know, something you touched up a little bit earlier, is when it comes to communication, there's also some other elements that can play a huge part. And one of them in particular is cultural differences. I mean, culture in it is one of those kind of huge things that can either make or break a conversation, so to speak.
Yes.
But from your point of view, what are the cultural insights that we need to look at in order to have good communication, regardless of us all being in the UK or being all over the world? It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, it's good to explain that, you know, some people might be listening to this and saying, what do you mean? Like, we live in this very globalized world where I can speak to Japan right now, or I could speak to Peru. But yes, we live in a very globalized world where we do use often English as the language of business. We often believe that we're communicating very instantly and understand each other very quickly. And in some cases, this does run smoothly. But the reality is that national culture has quite a big influence, and other cultural influences have a really big impact on how we communicate and how we're interacting with each other. So maybe you've had a situation, as I have, where you've received an email and you open it up and you look at this email and you think, that sounds a bit abrupt, or maybe even that sounds a bit rude. And the reason why you're maybe thinking this, that this unexpected email has this tone of voice to it, because of course emails don't have tone of voice normally, is because we're looking at things through our cultural glasses, like literally glasses. And we're not aware of the glasses we wear, because we're so used to it that we don't really think about it anymore. But this really, these glasses really are tinted in different ways. So the glasses I wear will give me information about what I think it means to be professional, and what is a polite email. And if I have to say no or disagree with you, how would I do that? And clearly the way I do that would be really different from, say, somebody in, who knows, Saudi Arabia, or somebody in maybe South Africa or Australia. So we have to be really aware of this, that even if we think we're all speaking literally the same language, we may not be. And we have to understand that when we have a reaction to communication, such as something is unexpected, or we think it's a little bit even perhaps rude, that probably isn't the intention. There's just probably some cultural factors at play we need to be aware of. And the first point for me is we need to be, aware of this. We need to bear that in mind and make sure that we perhaps explore a little bit what could be driving this type of communication.
Yeah. And you know what is so powerful what you're saying, because just through the podcast alone, I've interviewed so many women, business owners from all over the world, different cultures. Oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. And every single one of them that I meet, you can just see the cultural difference in a good way. So for me, very much is showing up with my own unique way, my own culture, but then being very open-minded and accepting them for who they are, and allowing them and giving them the platform in order to show up for who they are with their culture and just the way they communicate. And I find that to be so powerful, but it's something that I only picked up on, can I say, quite a few years after I started the podcast.
Interesting.
And that was just so interesting when I kind of got to that point. And can I say I had a little aha moment, and it just, I felt almost very fortunate being in a position where I can communicate with these amazing women, but also get to experience their culture through the conversations that we had.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important to say. You know, there'll be cultural similarities, there'll be cultural differences. Differences are not necessarily problems. Let's be really clear.
Yes.
You know, the differences are really rich and really interesting. I think what we have to understand are there so many different approaches. And as business owners, we need to be aware of that when we're communicating. And if we're starting to work perhaps with different countries and interacting with different people, we just need to be aware of our own communication style, and perhaps maybe think about, in what situations may I need to adapt what I'm doing to get a better result. And that's the whole point of cultural intelligence, and really raising your awareness around this point, is that it's really about how can you communicate better, how can you connect better to get a much better result. So that's really kind of what it's about for me.
Yeah. And also just to remember that it's about perspective. Everybody's got a different perspective, you know, whether it's cultural, it doesn't matter, but everybody's got a different perspective. And I think if you're open to listen to other people's opinions, to listen to other people's perspective on a certain topic, oh my gosh, you could learn so much. But I think also this is where communication is key, because you've got to be open-minded. You've got to be willing and committed to have a conversation with somebody and to communicate whatever, you know, nationality, whatever culture they come from, or whatever language they even speak. You've got to accept it and just, you know, be in the moment with them.
Absolutely. And I think from that point of view, it comes back to listening. You know, we often equate communication with actually broadcasting. That's what we, you know, when people say communication, they believe it's about, how do I become a better presenter, or how do I become a better talker, or become a TED speaker? But communication is two things. It's about listening as well. So we need to listen without making judgments. We need to listen without jumping to conclusions. We need to listen to really understand, to make sure we fully understand what this person is trying to say to us before we then react. And I think that is so important. In our world, which is so fast, we sometimes forget this. This is the important part of communication as well.
Yes. There's a couple of things that I just want to share here as well, which is something that I talk to my clients in particular about when it comes to communication. And this is that, you know, apart from listening, which is the number one thing, and I agree with you 100% there, apart from listening to people, to a prospecting client, whoever that might be, the other thing that you've got to remember is that when you start having a conversation, it is all about how you articulate with clarity and with structure what it is that you do and how you can serve them. And I find this comes beautifully back to what we spoke about in the beginning. Because of that kind of gap there, many people find that running a business is very hard. Signing up clients, selling is very hard, but it all comes down to communication. The brain only works with clarity and with structure. And if you can articulate that to somebody, they will then be able to understand what it is that you're doing, the structure that you're providing, and they'll be able to make a decision whether to work with you or not. So business can actually be really fun if you just, you know, touch up on that communication, but it starts with listening. It doesn't start with talking.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, listening, and I think, you know, what you're saying there is so important and so critical about this idea of clarity. You know, we can, you know, communicate at length. I think it was Winston Churchill who said something like, you know, I don't have time to write you a short letter, so I'm going to write you a really long one, because being concise and clear takes planning and thinking. So, you know, I think, you know, I always say to my clients, like, what's the one thing you want to say? Like, even in a 1 hour meeting or in a half an hour talk, what is the one thing you want to land? That if they only remembered that one thing, what would it be? And if you really force people, it's a difficult exercise, but if you really force people to think about this, then they get the clarity and go, right, that's where it has to start and that's where it has to close. And I know what it is now, the key message I need to say.
Yeah. And like we say, you know, coming back to everything that we kind of said in a nutshell, it gives you that confidence, because the more clarity you have with the message you want to get across, the more confidence it instills in you, the more you grow confidently in order to get out there and communicate with people. But, you know, in a nutshell, I think what it comes back to is understanding, if I can just put it together in one nutshell, understanding communication starts with listening, with clarity, and then communicating with confidence.
Yes, absolutely. That's very, very nicely summarized. Thank you.
Thank you. I have been listening to you today.
Love that.
No, honestly, I think, you know, this is such a great topic in particular to talk about, because I find a lot of people talking about business again, go out there and say, I'm going to start a business, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to love it, I'm going to run it, it's going to be my baby, it's going to help me financially. But the one big gap that nobody really concentrates on is communication. They think about marketing, which is one thing, but they don't think about communication. And I find that you are so right in saying that there is a gap in the communication element. Once you fill that gap, everything else just starts falling in place for you as a business owner.
Yeah, well, I think it just means that everything is stacked up in your favor. And there's a lot of confidence you can get from making sure that your messaging is clear. There's a lot of confidence to be had if you're in the right mindset and you really believe in what you're saying as well. And then it's really just about how you're delivering it and coming back to energy, body language, how you're kind of really connecting with people, human to human. And it's such a sort of funny thing, because in some ways, communication should be so easy. We've been making noises from even tiny babies that make noises to try and communicate something or cry to communicate something. And yet we sort of somehow lose, through all the kind of noise, I suppose, of life, the idea of how to just communicate simply and well.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you said it so beautifully. Now, to sum up everything, or to conclude with everything, you have got an amazing free video available for everybody here listening and watching today. Yes. What is this video all about, and what can they get from it?
Fantastic. So actually, it's a whole series of videos, which is very exciting. So basically, I've been creating what's called the Wednesday Words videos. These are released, not surprisingly, every Wednesday. And they are my communication skills and strategies in short, sharp learning episodes. So the idea of it is they are 10 minutes where you can deep dive into a particular topic and really learn about that aspect of communication, and then activate and take some learning from that, which you can apply to your own life and to your own business. So that is something I've been running for a little while. If you're interested in sort of receiving these and making sure that you also get that learning, then there's a link I think you're kind of going to share, which is something people can kind of sign up to receive the Wednesday Words videos.
Amazing. And just like Victoria said, the link will be down in my show notes. So by all means, if you have absolutely enjoyed today's podcast or today's video, I would highly suggest that you go and sign up to it, because like we said, communication is not something that you're born with. Yes, you get born by making sounds and stuff like that. You get learn how to talk, or you get taught how to talk, but not to listen in so many ways, as my phrase goes. But it is a skill that you can learn. And the more you learn the skill, the more it instills confidence in you in order to go out there and communicate effectively, not just with your team, but also with clients, with your family, with friends. It makes such a huge difference. So by all means, get in touch with Victoria, sign up for Wednesday Words. You're going to love it. And then connect with Victoria if you have more questions. Her details will be also in the show notes, where you can connect with her through Instagram, LinkedIn, and also if you want to watch more videos of what she's got to offer, her YouTube channel link will also be there, so you can get in touch with her. So just going to have some fun. Learn how to communicate. It's going to open up a huge door of possibilities and opportunities that you never expected would be out there. But you've got to take the action at the end of the day. Nobody can teach you how to do it if you're not willing to learn. So just go and have some fun. But Victoria, I just wanted to thank you and say, it's been such an honor to have you here. Honestly, I can talk about communication forever. It feels like we're in sync when we have this talk. But just thank you so much for taking the time and being here. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you to you as well. And it's really been great to join you. So thank you so much.
Amazing. We'll be in touch soon. So have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye for now.